Hello. Hello, everyone.
All right, Frida.
Oh, yeah. We really enjoy when people participate, so yes, feel free to clap. Ooh and ah for different things that you find interesting, etc. Welcome to Palm Springs Art Museum and to AMA Ask Me Anything Aluminaire. I am Luisa Heredia, the Chief Education and Community Engagement Officer here at the museum. So to start, I'll acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Agua Caliente Band of Cahuilla Indians. We recognize their ongoing cultural and spiritual connection to this land, past, present, and future. I also want to acknowledge that there are people joining us from multiple locations and within the virtual space, so a big welcome to you as well. Thank you for joining us. For today's program, we are following the AMA Ask Me Anything format. Now, how many of you are familiar with AMA? That's about how many of us were familiar with it, too. Yes. So it's actually drawn from and pretty popular on Reddit, and now we're bringing it here to the museum. The format is simple. Our panelists, Adam Lerner, the Executive Director, CEO of Palm Springs Art Museum, and Leo Marmol, who serves on the Board of Trustees, are here for you to AMA, ask them anything on Aluminaire. Yeah. So what do you need to know? Well, how is the audience going to ask questions? So if you are in the theater with us today, you should have received a note card and a golf pencil. So write down a question on the note card. We'll collect them, and then we'll use those cards to ask your questions. There will be 2 points very early on in the program where we'll have you move your cards over to the left or to the right, and we'll have our volunteers pick them up so that we can get all of your questions. If you miss out on these 2 early times, don't worry. We'll continue to ask for questions throughout the program. Now, if you are online, you can submit your questions using the chat function. So I'll start us off with a couple of introductory questions that will also give you all time to write down your own questions. And then we'll turn it over to Scott Slavin, Director of Marketing, Communications, and Graphic Design, as well as Sharissa Iqbal, our Associate Curator, who will go through the note cards and pose as many questions as they can to Adam and Leo. I'll also add some questions because I'm up here and I'll take that prerogative. And we'll just kind of use that to keep things going. So with that, let me introduce our 2 panelists. Leo Marmol serves on the Board of Trustees, and he is the lead on the Aluminaire Design and Construction Project. He is an architect based in Los Angeles and founding partner of the architecture firm Marmol Radziner. Adam Lerner. Oh.
All right, yeah, that's great.
Adam Lerner is the Joanne McGrath Executive Director and CEO of Palm Springs Art Museum, and he's been in this post for the past 2 years. We should also... Okay, so the first 2 questions will go to Leo. Leo, start us off. What is the Aluminaire House?
Let me warn you, the first answer is a little bit long-winded because I want to give a little bit of background and history on the house, and I promise you future answers will be more efficient, more modern, if you will. Okay, the Aluminaire House is one of the earliest examples of European modern architectural design to be exhibited in the United States. The home was designed by Albert Frey and A. Lawrence Kocher for the New York Architectural and Allied Arts Exposition of 1931. More than 100,000 people toured the home during that 8-day exhibition. In addition, the home was widely discussed in both architectural press as well as popular press. Now, the home was designed to illustrate how a small house could be industrially produced using prefabricated materials to provide cost-efficient housing for the middle class, thereby introducing the concept of modern living in association with European socialism, which sought to provide efficient, safe, beautiful housing for everybody. Albert Frey worked with Le Corbusier prior to coming to the US. While Villa Savoie was being designed, he was one of 2 employees working under Le Corbusier. Now, Corbusier authored the famed treatise Towards a New Architecture. Now, Frey was therefore one of the first architects to promote Le Corbusier's principles of design here in the United States. The term international style was defined by Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson in 1932 as the name of the exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And along with the exhibition, which was entitled Modern Architecture, an International Exhibition, the resulting book was entitled The International Style, Architecture Since 1922. In that exhibition and catalog, the curators included only 2 American examples, 2 works by American architects. The first was Richard Neutra's Lovell House, and the second was the Frey Kocher Aluminaire House. So it was one of 2 buildings that were on US soil included in that international exhibition. Now, the Aluminaire House exhibits all 5 points of a new architecture outlined in Corbu's treatise. 1, the main mass of the house is raised on exposed pilote, or columns. The free plan of the interior is distinguished and outlined independently of the structural system. The house exhibits on the exterior a curtain wall that is freed, liberated from the structure, and it exhibits long horizontal ribbon windows and a roof terrace with a garden. So those were the 5 principles outlined in Le Corbusier's treatise. So the Aluminaire House is significant as a representation of the ideals of modernism from the perspective of aesthetics, its use of technology, and its social purpose. And now, thanks to many people and many heroic acts, the house will live permanently right here in Palm Springs.
So after Leo answers this next question, we'll go ahead and collect note cards. So again, write down questions if you have them. Okay, so Leo, you give us a little bit of that historic context, a little bit of that architectural context. So what will it look like here in Palm Springs?
Thank you, Luisa. So we're excited. The century-long journey of this historic structure comes to an end here at the museum. The house historically occupied 4 sites prior to coming to Palm Springs, and construction is now underway on the 5th and final site here at the museum. So let's go to the site plan, and I'll show you where the north is up. The main museum is page up on this page. So we are right now in the main museum. To the south of the museum, we have an existing parking lot. We have redesigned the parking lot to take half of it to create a platform, if you will, for the placement of the Aluminaire House. So here is the Aluminaire House, here is Tockwitz, and here is Museum Way. So we'll show you a rendering. The first rendering is looking at the house from the street through this kind of entry courtyard. So let's go to the rendering. So you see here the rendering of what the house will be on site. So this is Museum Way along here. Here's this entry courtyard, the new parking lot to the north, entry gate into this fenced area that's simply a platform for the exhibition. And the next image will show you the exhibition within the fence line. So here we're now inside the fence, come through the entry gate, and you can see the exhibition in place, the main museum over here to the right.
Thank you, Leo. So if you have questions written on note cards, go ahead and pass them to either the left of you or to the right of you, and we'll have volunteers pick those cards up on either side. While we're doing that, we'll go ahead and give our next two questions to Adam. So Adam, why is the Palm Springs Art Museum interested in the Aluminaire House?
Well, several reasons. The obvious is that we have such great holdings in Albert Frey, and we've hitched our wagon to his horse. I don't know if you hitched the wagon or the horse. I'm from Queens. I think that the fundamental purpose of having this house, though, be part of our collection really relates to the association with modernism, because we talk so much about modern architecture in Palm Springs. And what this work does is it provides the essential context for all of that modern impulse. Because we often lose sight of the ideas that have motivated modernism. You know, in 1931, when this was created, there was this. It was created by this European Albert Frey and as well as Lawrence Kocher, with this impulse around using American industry, factory production, to be able to create affordable houses, so that there's such at the time this the beginning of this American century, this idea of American industry taking off, and there was the sense that actually what are the possibilities for a democratic forms of architecture, and the idea that this house could be factory produced, and because American industrial force can be used to be able to create houses that are not just well designed, but able to be distributed in a way that is accessible to everybody, was incredibly exciting. So that's an impulse that's fundamental to modernism, which we really don't see on a regular basis here in Palm Springs. We sort of enjoy modernism on a daily basis as a surface phenomena, as a design, as a style, and not as a sort of body of ideas. And this gives it the essential context. We're doing exactly what a museum should do, which is provide the intellectual context for the culture of the region. And this work does that in a way that I think I could not have imagined a better work to be able to provide the context for all of the modern design in Palm Springs.
Wonderful, thank you. Again, if you have questions after this next answer from Adam, we'll collect more, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions. So Adam, can you give us a brief history of how we got to where we are?
Sure. I will not give the history as elaborately as you've heard already. I just will take out from where you dropped off, which was that the house was at risk when it was on the Wallace Harrison estate as it was being developed. And really, credit is owed to Michael Schwarting and Francis Campani, who were the two architects in New York who saved it by basically bringing it to the New York Institute of Technology on Long Island. And yeah, that's what it's called. And but 1987, that was around the time it moved. Paul Goldberger wrote an article in the New York Times basically saying that this is one of the pivotal works of modern architecture in America, and that's stirred a lot of excitement around the house. So in 2004, New York Institute of Technology shut down its Long Island campus, and the house was then left vulnerable. It was still there, but it was subject to graffiti. 2012, Schwarting Company and Kenneth Frampton created an entity, the Aluminaire Foundation, and they dismantled the house and decided to put it in storage. And then that sort of began the process, really, of trying to find a permanent home, in a sense. And then in 2014, Mark Davis Happy birthday, Mark Davis. See that? Mark Davis and Modernism Week invited Schwarting and Company to Modernism Week, and where they gave a presentation about it. And people of Palm Springs, being the people of Palm Springs, doing what they do, got so excited about it after that presentation that in the reception afterwards, they all got together and said, like, how can we bring this thing to Palm Springs permanently? And then they created a working committee, and then it was Tracy Conrad, Mark Davis, William Kolpeck, Beth Edward Harris, Brad Dunning, as well as sort of others around that periphery who sort of really set forth the task of how can we bring this to Palm Springs. There were various other options that they explored. Tracy Conrad and Mark Davis really took the lead in exploring these options. It was considered to be, for a time, in the park across the street, the city-owned park. It was considered for a time to be on the College of the Desert campus. None of those worked out. When the museum expressed interest in it, Schwarting and Company eventually they agreed to be able to donate the work, and the work became a part of our permanent collection in 2020. And that's when the agreement was signed. During the pandemic, of course, created a bit of chaos and delay. I took over the museum in 2021 in the summertime and spent a good portion of that first year righting the ship after the pandemic. But though in 2022, museum trustees Leo and LJ Chella really took up the charge and said, how can we make this a reality? And Leo was more on the design side, whereas LJ led the silent campaign to be able to ensure we had the funding. So in 2022, that's when all the process was started to hire all the designers to be able to figure out the actual cost to make it happen. Early 2023, the museum announced the $2.6 million campaign. And by the time we announced it, LJ Chella, leading the effort, had already raised $2.1 million to make it happen. And so right now, we're at $2.3 million to be able to have it built. And so we're pretty close to the finish line. And then we have a little bit to raise on top of that, I'm sorry to say. But we broke ground this summer, and here we are.
Yeah, wonderful. So you'll also notice we'll be running just a couple of slides in the background to give you different kind of images of Aluminaire House. But with that, let's turn it over to some audience questions. Scott, Sharissa, what do you have for us?
Is it on? Yeah. We have a lot of questions. I'm just going to read this first one. On a hot day like today, if one puts popcorn in the center of the house, will it pop? Asking for a friend. We have a lot of temperature questions.
That's
Like,
what
darn
Ask
it,
Me Anything.
I have to scratch that one off now.
These people clearly know what Ask Me Anything is about. They get it.
I'm going to say, Leo, would this one go to you?
That is a great question. And I will tell you one that we struggled with as a design team, because yes, it is a challenge to put an all-metal box in the sun in Palm Springs. So we've had to do a number of things. The skin of the building has been, upgraded is a funny word. It's been rethought to separate the metal of the skin from the metal of the structure, so we don't get direct transmission of the sun inside the building. So that had to be redesigned. The other thing is, the original house was an exhibition. It wasn't intended to be lived in, so there was no heating or cooling. We have introduced cooling into the building, so there is an air conditioning system to, not to keep it like in here, a level of comfort, just to keep it from getting so hot that the structure would be damaged. This is a permanent installation. So there were a number of things that we had to reimagine and in a sense, upgrade. Again, funny word, but just to make it so that the house could endure the California desert.
Okay. Another question? Okay.
When will it be complete, and will the public be able to go inside?
We'll turn that one over to Adam.
Well, actually, I think the completion issue, let's let Leo take care of that.
Do you want to do the second part of that?
Actually, Leo.
Also Leo, okay.
Oh, Adam.
Well, I was saying,
Like, clearly I'm not doing my job.
I'll talk about design stuff, and then I'll be like, you know what? I should practice that.
Okay, 2 questions. The first one, it will be completed in association with an incredible celebration next year around the impact of Albert Frey. The museum is opening Brad Dunning's exhibit in January of next year. The art party next year will celebrate
I wanted to talk about all that stuff.
well, you gave it to me. Okay, and
know you were talking
then
about that. I
as
thought you were
part of
talking
all
about
that,
just
the
the design.
Aluminaire House will be completed, but just before Modernism Week next year. So it'll be done in January of next year. So it's close. We just broke ground. What was the second question?
Will you be able to go inside?
We will not be able to go inside. This is an exterior exhibition. So the house was designed in 1931. One of the things that's changed dramatically is our approach toward disabled access. It is a very small house. For us to make the house fully accessible, which we would have to do if we made it a public venue to go inside, means we'd have to integrate an elevator and make the stairs compliant. There is not enough space within this very efficient little modern house to do that. So the decision was made that the public, we, will not be able to go inside. Now, there are other historic examples like this. The Eames House in Los Angeles, which is another incredibly significant modern building. You cannot go inside. You simply experience that building, that historical artifact, from the grounds. We will have the same kind of experience, but it's a modern box, so there's plenty of window access. We will see inside the house, but you will not be able to go inside the house.
Adam, do you want to add anything?
Yeah.
No, he said everything. Well, I think also there are other code issues as well, like the fire code issues.
Oh, yeah, there's always
and
other
also, like,
code
the-
issues.
I just love talking
You
about
want to go
code.
through
I
all of
just
them?
love talking about
Okay,
code
let's
issues.
go through all the codes.
We'll stop
Yeah,
that there.
and- yeah, no, sorry. No, and we really tried. But I will say, yes, I will say this, though, is that, you know, I said that we have a $2.6 million campaign, and that's what gets us to build the house. But when we complete that, then we have a small campaign after that, another $200,000 to be able to create an exhibition that we hope to be inside the museum permanently. That would be a virtual reality exhibition that will allow people to be able to have a virtual experience of what it would like to be to navigate throughout the house. And I actually think that in many ways this could be a richer experience of the interior, because you can actually have access to lots of layers of information. And I think it'll give you it's a great way of being able to experience the interior. Brad Dunning is a fantastic expert on Frey's intentions for Aluminaire House, and has given us a lot of insight into that interior. And so we could design the interior virtually and then give people access to that in a virtual reality if we can raise the money.
Oh, great. That's what I was prompting you to.
Yeah, thank you. No,
That part.
I'm sorry.
Okay, Scott, Charissa.
Okay, of the 5 elements of Aluminaire,
Oh.
Adam, kidding, which ones are exemplified in Frey House 2?
Oh, interesting.
It's like a trivia question. We'll get back to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Frey House 2 is a different conception of modernism. If you think about Villa Savoye, Certainly,
Everyone think about Villa Savoye.
imagine Villa Savoye and imagine Frey House 2. One thing, Frey House 2 thinks about the site very differently. Villa Savoye is the perfect modern object placed very skillfully onto the landscape, right? Frey House 2 is a much more organic sensibility, and it's as though the house were just part of the site. The site literally is within the house. Frey House 2 has a much more organic sensibility. It's much more of a California modern building. The Le Corbusier's treatise is about European modernism. Frey's work here took on more of this California sensibility. It became more organic, more tied to the earth. The materials became warmer and softer and more as a reflection or a reaction to the desert, as opposed to the machine-made object of Villa Savoye placed on the organic landscape. No, go ahead.
The obvious connection, though, is the inexpensive, affordable house. Like, I mean, Frey House 2 was designed and built with very, very modest materials and meant to be it was very inexpensive to make. And I think that that's a clear affinity between those two.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
But Linda, also, in terms of having them both in our collection now, we're also kind of seeing these different forms of modernism.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's a really wonderful to be able to take you see Frey House 2, but then to trace and to be able to have that which was made later in Frey's career, and then have this earlier European influence, and to really understand where how the ideas traveled from Europe and then evolved into this very American style is really important and is so valuable. We're so lucky to be able to have that here in Palm Springs.
Absolutely.
Why hasn't this style become more popular?
That is a wonderful question. What do you all think? It's so interesting. One of the missions of modernism was to reject the past and all its trappings, the ornamentation that came from the past, the kind of historical burden that architects were kind of given to respond to. And modernism was to reject that. But somehow we hung on to that historical past culturally. Our buildings hung on to that historical past. The other issue, I think, directly has to do with cost. I think that one of the reasons you see buildings look the way they look so often, it's the economy, stupid, that the modernism imposes certain design attributes that in California are difficult to achieve. Number one, the walls are eviscerated. There's glass connection, interior to exterior relationship. Well, you start removing all those walls, that is the easiest and most efficient way to deal with what we call lateral forces, earthquake forces. So to respond to earthquakes and take away the walls means we have to increase the sophistication of the structure. So we start introducing steel. Energy starts to become a complex issue when you just have glass. So construction costs actually go up. I remember talking with Julius Schulman extensively, and he would always say that the case study program was an incredible achievement and success from a marketing perspective, but a complete failure from the perspective of making modern buildings more affordable and accessible. Modern buildings actually became more expensive. As we often say, less costs more.
But the dream of the building system that could be standardized and replicated, we still haven't quite given up on that dream. People are still experimenting and trying, and even today, even with the printed 3D printed house concepts and building systems that prefabricated homes. Like there's still this wish to be able to create to realize that dream that Frey and Kocher embodied, and it might. And one day, if there is, at some point, a building system that is, able to be standardized and manufactured at mass produced at scale, then all of a sudden this house will be incredibly important, as the beginning of that system.
Do you want to hear how Le Corbusier answered that question? I had so much fun rereading parts of this treatise last night, because treatises are they're filled with such exuberance and hubris, this sense of incredible confidence. The person who practices a religion and does not believe in it is a poor wretch. He is to be pitied. We are to be pitied for living in unworthy houses, since they ruin our health and our morale. It is our lot to have become sedentary creatures. Our houses gnaw at us in our sluggishness like a consumption. We shall soon need far too many sanatoriums. We are to be pitied. Our houses disgust us. We fly from them and frequent restaurants and nightclubs, or we gather together in our houses gloomily and secretly like wretched animals. We are becoming demoralized.
Wow.
That's what Le Corbusier thought of all those houses you see all over America.
All right, we'll turn it back over.
When was that, Leo? I'm just curious.
When was this written?
When would he have said that? Just curious.
When was this written? When was this written? 1931? Okay. 30, 29?
Actually, and by the way, a point though is, on some level, like the style of the Frey house, this sort of pared down modern style, actually did win. I mean, from the way that, because even though modernism is not ubiquitous, it still has a bigger footprint on America than it did back at that time.
Even traditional houses today exemplify some of the 5 principles that Le Corbusier wrote about. One is the open plan. The idea of a great room where the kitchen, living, family room, it's all one experience. That's a modern idea that came from the Industrial Revolution, which allowed us to have structure kind of liberated and more openness within the plan. So even the traditional homes, tract homes that you see built that look like more ranch style representations stylistically, they still have open plans. They're still connected to the garden, the indoor-outdoor relationship. So you could argue that in some way, Le Corbusier's principles has gotten into even traditional homes today. There are exceptions, but many of them.
What is the lighting plan for evening exhibition of the house?
Do you want to do
No,
that?
absolutely not.
It's like, I'll take that one.
Being the lighting
We are reproducing, we are bringing back the original lighting, which is more theatrical because, again, it's an exhibition. Over the years, when it became a real house, more traditional lighting was integrated, but we are bringing back the more theatrical kind of lighting, and then there's exterior lighting to light the exhibition. But again, we're not going to be using the interiors at night, so there's emergency lighting, but more than anything, there's just dim theatrical lighting within the house to allow it to glow from within, but then the exterior will be lit at night, so you can even see it from the street.
What materials are used to build the house?
It's clearly an architectural group. I like that. The materials of the house were part of its revolutionary character. This is coming during the Industrial Revolution, and part of what Le Corbusier was interested in was the use of industrialized products and how those could be integrated into our housing stock to make them more efficient and less costly. So the materials were modern materials at the time: steel, aluminum. Aluminum was a new industrialized product. Alcoa was one of the donators to the exhibition. They donated the exterior skin of the material, which is aluminum. So this is an aluminum house. So it's steel, it's aluminum, glass, of course. Those are the primary materials. There's some other interior finishes integrated into the house, but this is an all-metal house, and that in and of itself was a technological change in the 1930s.
Okay. So at this point, if there are other people who have questions on note cards, you can go ahead and pass those to the right or the left, and we'll have volunteers pick those up in case there are any other extra questions that are still out there. And please add some questions for Adam.
Well, what was the original cost to fabricate Aluminaire in 1931?
So the original cost, we have to remember, the original house was an exhibition. So the materials were donated. Alcoa gave Frey and Kocher the materials because it was part of the marketing scheme to help market a new way of thinking about building materials and integrating aluminum into our buildings. So we don't know the original cost, but it was very low. It was produced, put together in 10 days, and most of the materials were donated. However, when the house was purchased by Wallace Harrison, it was purchased for $1,000, moved to his site in Long Island. He had an 85-acre site in Long Island. He was an architect, and he put up the home. The literature says he was, however, surprised as to how expensive it was to rebuild the house. That was like $28,000. Again, a lot of money at that time to put the house back together again and make it not an exhibition, but an actual house. So he had it on his 85 acres and then moved it once to another part. So the first site was the exhibition. And by the way, that was within an enclosed space. So the house didn't have to have heating or cooling or waterproofing or anything. It was an exhibition. It then moved to Long Island on 2 different sites. At that point, it became a house and started to change.
To be fair, though, the cost, I'm not sure who we're being fair to, but the cost of constructing it also included a lot of site preparation, like the road they had to build. Wallace Harrison had to build to the house.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, the Alcoa building in Pittsburgh was all aluminum in the 50s and had aluminum wiring, underlined. So did Alcoa Executive's modern houses. Big problem. Does Aluminaire have the same wiring?
It will not today have the same wiring. It will have wiring that meets current code standards. And it doesn't have a great deal of electricity. We have some service outlets and lighting that we just described. But the house still has to meet current code structures. And that's part of the cost we've adopted in putting up the house. And so we've talked about the skin and how we've had to rethink that. We had to respond to current structural codes. So the structure itself had to be analyzed and upgraded. Even though no one's living in it, it still needs to perform during an earthquake. So we did have to kind of bring it up to current standard, which is part of the cost burden that we're inheriting today.
Will there be any time-lapse videos available to the public to show the reconstruction of this iconic building?
Adam!
Yes.
You're You're clearly not an architect.
Adam Lerner, what are your plans for the Architecture and Design Center?
Well, that's great. Thank you. Listen, first of all, I think that one of the exciting things about Aluminaire House construction is that it gives us the opportunity to really celebrate the architecture design offerings of the museum. And it brings a lot of attention to Albert Frey, who is at the center of our holdings. The Aluminaire House coincides with a year of celebrating Albert Frey in a sense. You've got this exhibition which opens in January. The members' preview is January 12th. We have a book that we're producing that along with the exhibition. So Brad Dunning edited a major publication on Albert Frey, and that will be launched in February, and we'll have the launch around Modernism Week. And I feel that between the exhibition, the Albert Frey retrospective, the Aluminaire House, this publication, we will have a lot of momentum around what we're doing in the Architecture and Design Center. We've got a great program coming up at the Architecture and Design Center. We have an adjunct curator of architecture and design, Robert Kett, who teaches at the Art Center Pasadena, and he organized a fantastic exhibition called SOS La Vida, which will open in August 11th, and that is August 12th. It'll open. Thank you. Members preview is August 11th. Members preview is August 11th. I'm just making a subtle plea for membership here, he curated an exhibition of the history of graphic design in Mexico, and this is basically showing how graphic design in Mexico evolved in a separate path than it did in the United States, whereas American graphic design evolved through its relationship to commerce, mostly through the advertising industry. The argument is that in Mexico that it evolved mostly through its relationship to popular and folk culture, often including protest movements. And so that's an exhibition that's original scholarship that we're producing that opens in the summer. And then we've got the Albert Frey retrospective right after that. And then right after that, another exhibition that Robert Kett is organizing of designer Ryan Preciado. And then after that, another exhibition called Buildings Meet People, which is about the relationship between architecture and the lived experience. And using several architects as an example, demonstrating how it is that buildings evolve in relationship to their use. So all of this really, I think, is just a great lineup, a great program that I think that the Aluminaire House and all the offerings we have for around Albert Frey this year really are part of a bigger resurgence of interest in the architecture and design program, and we hope to be able to have a permanent curator hired as soon as we, it's in line in our hiring process. We're first hiring a chief curator, and then we've got a few more hires, and we will, it's really important to us to make sure we have a director of that program, and that is something that we're hoping to have before too long.
And I'll just add one or two other things. For the opening of SOS La Vida, we also will have some lectures and some things that are happening on site at A&D. So always check the museum website or your emails for the different programs that we have coming up, all related around A&D.
Was there an interior aesthetic with respect to furniture, and will the house have furnishings?
There was an interior design that included furnishings. Our initial installation is not going to include any interior improvements or furniture, but yes, there was a design for the interiors, and as part of the virtual exhibit that we hope to develop, it will be to illustrate the furniture that was designed, the interior finishes, none of which are produced today. And so virtually we hope to give that interior experience.
And at the Frey retrospective that you'll see in this winter, you'll see the plans for his Frey's really innovative furniture designs. Things like the stool that's actually his chairs that were springs, sort of spring-based, or a bed that was suspended so that he thought you can clean them easier, get underneath them. Those kind of like experimental projects, you'll see those in the book and in the exhibition.
I'll actually ask a question here to Leo, since you're talking a bit about design, and since we have so many questions for you. Who is the design team?
Okay. So to celebrate that, first of all, the historic architects, as Adam mentioned, Francis Campani and Michael Schwarting, Campani-Schwarting, they really have been our historical guides for this entire process. The museum then hired an executive architect, that is Alan Sanborn of Sanborn Architectural Group. We have a general contractor. Our general contractor is David and Jason Johnston. Chris Swanson is our superintendent, and that's D.W. Johnston Construction. Our landscape architect is Tom Dozie, TKD Associates. Structural engineer, C.J. Clark of the WT Group. Our mechanical electrical engineer that had to solve all those technical problems is Dave Selmer of Equity Spec MEP Engineers. And we already recognized earlier the Aluminaire House Foundation here in Palm Springs with Mark Davis and Tracy Conrad. The museum team that worked with me as a trustee, Tom Minder, Jane Emerson, and LJ Chella. And then from the staff here, the people here on staff that helped us make this possible, of course, Adam, Leslie Stewart, and Jack Pierce. So that's the team that the museum commissioned to make this possible.
Great.
Does this Aluminaire House, the original, have any copies in existence, or is it the only one?
This is the only one. This is, and the majority of materials that are going into this building are original materials from 1931. This is, when you think about the word authenticity, which is a word that preservationists use often, authenticity is often an evaluation about how much historic material remains within the project. And there is a struggle within the preservation community with the kind of theoretical aspects of authenticity and the pragmatic struggle of architects trying to make old things usable by today's standards. And there is a struggle in there to keep as much fabric, original fabric as possible, to keep the authenticity high. This building is an incredibly authentic reconstruction of a historic artifact. It is very rare that we have an artifact of this age that has so much original fabric remaining. And that's really credited to Michael and Francis and their commitment to preserve this artifact, to catalog it when they took it down in Islip from the Institute, and they cataloged, they preserved, they boxed it up, and it got delivered to us in a big container. And so this is a very unique opportunity for us to think about and struggle with that word authentic in the preservation kind of lexicon. And so obviously I'm excited to be able to put back together something that has so much original fabric.
Wonderful. Sharissa?
What inspired Frey to design the Aluminaire House?
The exhibition that they were part of happened every 2 years. The year before, Kocher designed an office, a modern office experience that was really well attended. It was well received, and there was a lot of acclaim around the previous exhibition. So they invited Mr. Kocher to come back the next year. Albert Frey had moved to New York from working with Le Corbusier, started working with Kocher. So Kocher and Frey were already working together, so they designed the next exhibition and had this opportunity to then illustrate the ideals that inspired Albert Frey from Europe. So that's kind of the progression, and they were invited to come back for the next exhibition.
And also, when it was presented in this exhibition in 1931, it was actually presented in the materials section, right? So therefore, what they were doing, which is a really interesting aspect of it, there's a whole lot of examples of architecture that were fairly ho-hum, but this was actually not part of the exhibition of innovative architecture. This was about the use of materials. That's how they shoehorned it into the exhibition at the time. And of course, it was the exhibition in general was so anti-modern that Philip Johnson actually organized this sort of alternative exhibition uptown that would present examples of modern architecture. And so I think that they really were demonstrating how modern materials can be put to use in innovative design.
So we have read all the cards that we can read. The pencils are tough, I know. I do have one. What are your future plans for Frey House 2?
Oh, interesting. Well, I could take that. So, Frey House 2 is a beloved part of our collection, and we have done some work, thanks in large part to our director of collections, Rachel Faust, to restore elements of the house already. So therefore, the section of the house that was created that Jean Scherer used is now redone. I don't know if you've got a chance to see that, but our intention is to continue to invest in the conservation and restoration of that house so that we can actually get it to a point where we feel like that it is in a very presentable condition. And we're hoping that the momentum that we have around Albert Frey from Aluminaire House and these exhibitions will be able to then roll into the next phase, which would be investment in Frey House 2.
Wonderful. And I will do a final question then to Adam. Tell us about the campaign and how people can get involved.
Oh, the campaign, right. Well, the great thing, thank you for that, and I'm sure everyone had that question on their card. How do you get involved in the campaign? The great thing about the campaign is that we're almost there. We have about another 350,000 or so, to be able to just complete the building, and we will be able to give everybody access, so that you can contribute at various levels. But I have no doubt that we'll get to the finish line for the first part of it with your excitement and all the enthusiasm in our community. What I really hope is that we could get the support for that remaining $200,000 that will really allow us to give people a virtual reality experience of the interiors. I think that would be the icing on the cake that will make it, that will really give people a rich experience. So you can contact the museum, contact our director of anyone in our development department. Do we have Michael's email? Oh, Michael Hinkle is over here. Michael, why don't you stand up so everyone can you could talk to Michael, and you can talk to Louis Baumgartner as well, or LJ Cheller, myself, and we will also have opportunities that we will make very, very clear to you and then over the next few months. So look forward to being able to tell you all about that.
Wonderful. And Leo, am I seeing that you maybe have another quote for us?
Should we read another quote from Le Corbusier? This is his response now. You've heard his criticism. Now his response. How do we come out of this malaise? Architects work in styles or discuss questions of structure in and out of season. Their clients, the public, still think in terms of conventional appearance, and the reason on the foundations of an insufficient education. Our external world has been enormously transformed in its outward appearance and in the use made of it by reason of the machine. We have gained a new perspective and a new social life, but we have not yet adopted the house thereto. So Le Corbusier's answer and the hope and dream of the Aluminaire House was to take this machine thinking, because all through this treatise, what Corb does is celebrate the engineer and pans the architect all the way through this book. He celebrates the engineer because the engineer thinks in terms of efficiency and using materials to their best use and using as little material as possible to create as much human joy and beauty as possible. So for Le Corbusier, Albert Frey, and what the Aluminaire House represents was this incredible hope, this incredible dream that somehow this new technology would create a new way of thinking for us. Now, have we done that? I would say we're still very much within that program. We're still trying to think about and figure out what these words mean. Why don't all the houses in America look like the Aluminaire House? I don't think that's a criticism of the house at all. I think it talks to how modern this thinking was and how much work we still have to do. So the fact that we as a museum and an institution have this artifact to learn from and teach from is such an incredible kind of opportunity for us. So I'm really excited. We are so grateful to so many of you who have donated already to make this possible. We have a little bit yet to go, as Adam was talking about, but the fact that we just have a little bit with a big enterprise like this shows so much commitment from the community. So we at the museum are so grateful to all of you for the incredible support and the fact that you all came out in 115-degree weather to ask questions about, aluminum and steel, to me is such a blessing, and it's the reason why I love Palm Springs. Thank you.
Great.
Do we have a final question
I
from Mark?
think we could allow Mark Davis
We're
to break
gonna
protocol.
definitely.
Made it all the way down, but the direct correlation to Palm Springs is a 1934 Kocher Sampson building,
Oh.
which Frey designed.
Yeah.
It's in Palm Springs, and it was designed for Kocher's brother. So there's such connectivity.
Albert Frey came to Palm Springs to design a building for Lawrence Kocher's brother, Dr. J.J. Kocher, the Kocher Sampson building, which still exists. That's what brought Albert Frey here in 1934. He went back to New York, but then he came back permanently in 1939 because he was so moved by the beauty and the power of the desert. So yes, the connection to Albert Frey and Albert Frey's impact on the history and development of this city. But the other thing about Albert Frey, and you'll see this in the exhibition that Brad Dunning is putting together, is that there was also an incredibly collaborative spirit within the city. There were a number of modern architects. When Frey first came to Palm Springs, he teamed up with, his name just slipped from my mind, John Porter Clark. So he worked with Mr. Clark for a number of years. Clark then went on his own, so did Albert Frey. But so many of the buildings were collaborations of the modernists here in Palm Springs. So yes, the connection to Frey, and that's what I love about next year's celebration of the museum, is bringing all of this energy and beauty and modern spirit around Mr. Frey to celebrate the impact of these modernists on this city.
Well, with that, a big thank you to Adam and to Leo. We'll also do a couple more thank yous to our staff, to our volunteers, and of course to all of you. Definitely check out the museum website for our upcoming exhibitions and programs. The one that's coming up next, as Adam mentioned, Eso es la Vida, opens to members on August 11th and opens to the public on August 12th. So we hope to see you at the A&D Center.
And we'll give one more plug. Modernism Weekend, we are doing a lecture in this hall again about the Aluminaire House, so we will explore the history in more depth. So keep an eye on the Modernism Week website, and then in February, there will be another lecture also celebrating the Aluminaire House, at that point, the opening thereof. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.